This is government terrorism, point blank, end of story. This is the legalization of American fascism.
Dr. Gold, John Strand. John, how did it feel this morning?
Felt amazing.
Well, let's just tell everybody what happened this morning.
I was released from the tyrannical talons of the federal government, back to the country that I love, and the woman that I love, and the family that I love. That's what happened.
And you were in prison in Louisiana.
Yeah.
For how long?
I was in BOP custody for a year. Half of that was in Miami, and the latter half was in Louisiana. And
how long did they have you at Oakdale?
Oh, that Oakdale was Louisiana, so that was the second half. 6 months.
That was the second half of that. And so there was a period of time from when we heard from Judge Christopher Cooper that he was going to release you. What has that been, a couple of weeks? A week?
Very short. It was only 8 days prior to John's release that we knew he was going to be released.
How did you feel like even having to wait during that time?
That's interesting. I really had to prepare myself for any eventuality. It was entirely within the realm of possibility that he would leave me there for 3 years. So I had to kind of approach it that way while being hopeful that I would get out.
We have known of other January 6th defendants who, in fact, did get their release orders and had their families show up to pick them up from their location where they were imprisoned and were denied that day and their families were turned away. Wow. Did that ever cross your mind that might happen to you as well?
No, I didn't worry about that. I didn't think about it. I knew at that point, once I was in Oakdale, Louisiana, I had an understanding of where I was at in the process, and I understood what God was using that time for in my life, and I understood that I had an amazing team and incredible lawyers doing everything humanly possible and even superhumanly possible to fight for me. So I was just trusting in that.
We've got a lot of background to both of your stories that I want to touch on. We've got to cover this. We can't tell the story of Dr. Gold and John Strand without going into the background. But I want to deal a little bit more about how you felt today, how you felt with this imminently coming up. But before we do that, do you regret at all going through a jury trial?
Zero.
Zero regrets.
I've had zero regret, and I have not regretted it for a single second since it started 3-some years ago. 3.5 years.
Even though you knew going in that this was a no-win battle in front of a DC jury.
Yeah, I knew in January of 2021 that the end game here was prison at least, and who knows what else. And I knew that was coming. I knew that was part of the script, and I knew that God had called me to do the right thing no matter what their script said.
So let's go to a little bit of the background. I'm going to, depending upon how we edit this thing, we may jump around, but it's not important at this moment. But let's talk about how we got there, specifically relating to January 6th, first of all, because, and again, I'm going to go a little bit in reverse. So the John Strand story is that you said, no, I'm not going to take a plea deal. I'm going to walk through the fire.
Exactly.
Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and John Strand, right?
That's right.
That's the story.
It's in my book.
Okay. Right. And then, Dr. Gold, you made the other decision. You took the plea deal.
Yeah.
Can you explain what was the difference in your thought process there?
Right. So this is an amazing question. This is the question that we really want to answer for the American people. We had the exact same fact pattern and the exact same indictment, the exact same charges. We were both charged with a false charge, a felony charge of 20 years that was just essentially reversed at the Supreme Court level called Fisher. But of course, in real time, we didn't know that would happen. We're charged with this 20-year felony and 4 misdemeanors, both of us, the same thing. And as we wound our way through the process, I never intended to take a plea. This John Strand absolutely was never going to take a plea, but I also was not going to take a plea until I understood it was a 20-year felony. And I have a medical license and a law license and a nonprofit to run. But if I'm being brutally honest, I was scared too. I mean, you look at a 20-year felony, I can't just shift it to the external factors that I just named. Looking down a 20-year felony is a pretty scary moment, but I decided to take a plea. I thought it was the most rational decision. We know that all the J6 defendants really get convicted. So I don't regret the decision to take a single misdemeanor plea, but it has left me a little bit tongue-tied in what I might say publicly. And I have tremendous admiration for a person who said, under no circumstances will I bear false witness. And I want to share with the world that John Strand's reason for doing this was really the 9th commandment of the 10 commandments, which is, I will not bear false witness, even if it's against myself. So I made a rational decision. I too think I was treated very harshly. I don't think I was treated easily, but it's pretty difficult to look at a 20-year felony and say, I will walk through that fire. And I didn't.
Also, among many other lies, the prosecutors threatened her with an additional charge of an assault of a police officer.
Yes.
Although there's no video evidence of that ever happening.
They brought all their evidence of that in my trial because they essentially they didn't bring the charge, but they tried to enhance my sentence by 5-10 years related to those types of things. So they tried it with me and I just said, bring it on. But in her decision-making process with the plea or not, they were essentially, without saying it, if you don't take this plea, we're going to add an assault charge. And that only exponentially worsens the public perception, which is the only thing that matters.
Right.
Because the court of public opinion is where all of this is actually being adjudicated before we ever get
eventually. And we hope that the court of a public opinion will eventually be the one that rules in favor of all of us once we get the truths out.
Yeah,
that's
the appeal of the court of public opinion.
That's correct.
I just want to say that for people who've come up to me or to yourself, because you've been in similar, and they'll say things as though, well, I don't think I could do that, what John did. My answer is, of course you couldn't. We've never met anybody who turned down a single misdemeanor plea to walk through the fire of a felony. So it's difficult.
Everybody always wants to know, what were the charges? You can give us the brief, abbreviated version of those charges.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. So I'm a lawyer. For those of you who don't know that, I'm a physician, but I'm also an attorney. So we were charged, as many as hundreds of J6 defendants were, with a single felony called the 1512 C2, 18 USC 1512 C2. This is known as a Sarbanes-Oxley bill after the two congressmen who put it forward. If you remember 20 years ago, the whole Enron scandal, there was this kind of loophole. This is the common way of understanding it, that Arthur Andersen, the accounting firm, had shredded evidence. Right. I have no opinion on the merits or truth of that, but because there was shredding going on, Congressman Sarbanes and Congressman Oxley said, let's make this other bill that will capture bad corporate actors.
Plug the hole.
So if you look at the legislative history, when Congress talked about this bill, they said this is to stop bad corporate actors from committing corporate fraud and shredding evidence. So the title of this felony is witness tampering and evidence shredding. You might say to yourself, what does this have to do with J6 political protesters? And the answer is nothing, absolutely nothing. In addition to that single felony charge, which carried a 20-year potential penalty, there were 4 misdemeanors, entering and remaining, parading, disorderly conduct, things like that. Of course, there was no evidence of that either. So those were the charges.
Right. They obviously, and this is typical of the Department of Justice, and even in non-January 6 cases, they always overcharge. They always scare you with at least one charge to make you, or to use as a cudgel to force you into the plea deal.
May I share with you? So there's two kinds of overcharging. There's vertical overcharging and horizontal overcharging. You might ask yourself, how does a 5-minute episode become 5 crimes? Right. All of a sudden, I've lived all my life as a law-abiding citizen, but all of a sudden, I had a life of hardened criminality where I committed 5 crimes in 5 minutes. Right. That's called horizontal overcharging. They take one event and they slice and dice it till you have 5 charges. And then the vertical overcharging is when they throw such a harsh charge at you that you take a plea deal. And you are correct. They've done this for decades. Our department, our DOJ, et cetera. But in this particular case, I think they got even more aggressive because it was very important to them to have everybody collapse really quickly, to reduce discovery and to affect the court of public opinion. So they were even harsher than usual.
So both of you had the exact same charges. You obviously went one direction. You decided to go for the jury trial. You knew what the net result of that was going to be.
100%.
Because we've actually heard the Department of Justice, lawyers, AUSAs, utter word similar to what I'm about to say here, is that if you put us through this, you're going to pay the price.
Mm-hmm.
Same charges. You took the plea deal. You got 2 months, 60 days.
So this is a really important legal point, Steve, and that is that there's, in our law, you are not supposed to have what's called a trial penalty.
Mm-hmm.
If a defendant chooses to go to trial, that is their constitutional right. And you're not allowed to punish that defendant if they lose, and then you're not allowed as a judge to give a harsher sentence. That's called a trial penalty, and you're not allowed to do it. It's illegal. Having said that, judges do it all the time. Right. But this is a very interesting case because we had the same facts, we had the same indictment, we had the same every detail, right? Except one took a plea and one went to trial. So I ask you, how did we get such disparate sentences if there isn't a trial penalty?
I'll tell you why. It's because you made government employees work. So they punished you for it.
That is the actual crime.
Actually, no, the crime was complaining about the government.
Yeah, well, that's what many of us do, especially those of us in journalism. That's our job. That's why it's been called for generations the fourth estate. We're supposed to hold the government accountable. We're supposed to be the one to lead the charge in that regard.
The only thing the media is holding right now is the government's water.
Right. And the mistake, again, not mistake, that you made, and I actually would like to get Dr. Gold to just comment one more time on a legal issue, is I have never in my life been opposed to the idea of the concept of accepting a plea deal until I began to examine January 6 cases and began to see how this is handled and to see how the punishments are doled out as a result of making them work for the conviction.
Let's share some information. The government, this is news to people. The prosecution is not allowed to bring an indictment unless it can already prove all elements of the crime have been met. So if there's a proper indictment where we have met element A, B, C, D, and E, in other words, we have all the facts, this person has done this thing, then they bring the charge, and it may be very rational to accept a plea deal. In fact, I do think most criminals who've done a criminal act, it does make the most sense. But what went wrong, many things went wrong here. One of the things went wrong is that the Department of Justice was bringing charges, indictments on statutes that it did not have the evidence that the defendant met those elements. For example, was there any evidence of the misdemeanors, of disorderly conduct? There's no evidence. All of our time is on video. You can see there's no disorderly. You can see that. So that's really what went wrong. There's nothing really wrong with a system that allows administrative ease in terms of a plea, but what's wrong is you're not allowed to over-indict.
Weaponize.
You're not allowed to indict for crimes that you don't have the evidence the person has done, because it's a very dishonest system. You need the government to act honestly so you can have an honest plea deal. So that's what went wrong.
Honest government is an oxymoron.
But it's aspirational.
Yeah.
You said earlier that this was a situation that as early as January of 2021, in the days following, you knew that your path was at least going in the direction of prison. Yeah. What made you so convinced of that so early on?
The arrest.
I know how the government operates. I mean, you can't know what's in another person's mind or heart. You can only know their behavior. So I have observed the government's behavior. That's generally the answer.
But we had seen demonstrations in Washington before. We had, on January 20th of 2017, hundreds of people were arrested for violent behavior, attacking and assaulting law enforcement. And we saw not only acquittals, we saw hung juries, and then we saw the remainder of the cases, a couple hundred of them, dismissed and dropped.
Right. For protesters
you didn't think that might happen for January 6th defendants?
Well, no, because I'm clear-minded. And
I also think from the outset, they never treated it like any other normal protest, right? From the outset, they lied about what actually happened that day, as you well know. So we don't dispute that the videos you've seen that look problematic happened, but what you didn't see were the 95% of the rest of the area that wasn't violent, wasn't having this. So first, from the outset, there was a mission bias. We didn't see what we didn't see. The other thing is 12 days after January 6th, let me back up. I never thought they were going to treat it like they'd always treated political protesters, because immediately the Department of Justice and the FBI started treating things differently. A few days after J6, I appeared on a FBI's most wanted list. How crazy is that? Right. And 12 days later, we were both subjected to a very violent SWAT team arrest where they broke down our doors with battering rams and huge weapons with laser sight beams pointed at our chest. That never had happened in the past. So that was certainly a clue that it was going to be different.
We were assaulted in a militant fashion on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. So that was about all the evidence that I needed to understand what their intention was. Like she said, we were there on January 6th, so we know what happened and what didn't happen. And after we were arrested, it was very obvious the way they were framing this event, and that it was serving a purpose for them.
Explain to everyone what that assault looked like, because did you get a phone call from the FBI first?
Oh.
Now, see, I got a call from the FBI 6 months later in July. They called me at 10 o'clock in the morning. They knew that I was going to be in D.C. speaking at a political event the next evening, and they actually politely asked me. They said, "We see that from your calendar that they're watching me. We see from your calendar that you're going to be in the D.C. area tomorrow night, and we were just wondering how early you were going to be there. Maybe you could sit down with a couple of our guys for a couple of hours in the afternoon." To which I immediately responded, I said, "I am going to be early, but unfortunately, my attorney won't be able to be there." "Oh, yes, okay. Well, we can change. We can schedule this for another time." You didn't get that courtesy call, did you?
I didn't get any courtesy whatsoever.
Explained what happened.
We were assaulted. We were in the living room on a conference call with several other colleagues working on a Monday morning at around maybe 11, shortly before noon. And suddenly we heard just the most blood-curdling screams you can imagine. I mean, I felt my head vibrating from the screams.
Where were the screams coming from?
Right outside the hall. I mean, basically as far as I am from you.
From the agents?
Yes.
And what were they saying?
FBI.
They were screaming, "FBI, FBI, open the door," which we froze thinking it's a prank or criminals.
I did not think it was real. There's no universe under which I thought this was legit.
And then within about 30 to 40 seconds, they broke the door to pieces. And then a dozen agents with assault rifles and red laser sight dots bouncing on your chest. It was a scene straight out of a Jason Bourne movie.
So there was no initial knock.
Nope. Just a scream assault.
Well, they pounded on the door.
Pounded on the door.
FBI, FBI, FBI.
Yeah.
And it was so surreal and bizarre. I really thought it was a Colombia cartel coming to murder me. That's really what I thought. No way did I think this was real. It was so over the top. I'm a public person. You could pick up the phone. You could call me. No way did we think this was real.
Right.
And then by the time it took to get to the doors, a smallish space, they had broken the door down. And I just want to share one of the things that's going wrong in our society is that ordinary men and women are allowing this to happen. Under no circumstances should these ordinary officers have allowed themselves to be used as tools of a state where they're really almost killing normal American citizens. They were standing so close to us with these huge assault weapons pointed right at our chest. And I've never been in a situation of trouble. I don't think you've been either. And on instinct, by mistake, I kind of took a half step forward. He could have shot me dead, right? Because he's saying FBI and I take a half step forward. That would have been resisting arrest. I don't know what it would have been. So I think they're setting up ordinary men and women to kill, to knock off dissidents.
Yeah, her instinct was simply to address the person there and speak to you.
And
he took that as an attack, or could have.
He could have.
I mean, they
Thank
were
God.
I could smell the sweat on the officers.
Let me ask you this. In that initial warrant, the arrest warrant, was the 1512 C2
Yes.
already on there?
Yes.
So when you were arrested, so this wasn't a superseding indictment they added later?
No, all of our charges were there from the beginning.
From the beginning.
But if you go back and you look at what criteria are used for a SWAT team arrest, we don't have any of them. It has to do with history of criminality, history of violence, history of weapons, being a gang member. Have you ever been in prison before? None of those criteria. So what I'm very concerned about is that the average ordinary officer who's in that situation could very easily have pulled the trigger.
Right.
And bye-bye us.
And we have many cases, we won't spend our time talking about those, where only the 4 basic misdemeanors were on their arrest warrant, and yet 15, 20, 25 armed agents, local police as well, show up at the door, put the red dots on them, their wives, their children.
Yeah, this is government terrorism.
Yeah.
Point blank. End of story. This is the legalization of American fascism. This is Nazi America. That's what it is.
Tell me why you knew you could not get a fair trial in D.C.
Because it's DC.
Well,
Explain.
It's self-evident. 95% of them vote for the regime that is currently controlling the levers of power in our country and is literally actively attacking the true president that represents our views on how the country should be run.
Did you ever have a moment of hope during this process that maybe I can get through to the jury?
Not really. No.
Did you testify on your own behalf?
I did.
You did.
4 straight hours.
Did you get any sense of from either body language or facial expressions from any of the jurors that maybe they were listening to you and weren't already predisposed?
No. They were hanging on every word. They were hanging on every word. They couldn't wait to see another MAGA Republican lynched. That was a lynching.
so in real time, though, I think that a lot of people thought John would be the first person to be acquitted. I mean, his case was really that strong.
Yeah.
I was an invited guest speaker with a permit to be in that location. He was working as my security that day. I was the one who made the decision to go in. He actually said you shouldn't go in. I mean, it was as innocent as you could get. You didn't let your client, get trampled is essentially what it was. And he made a very compelling witness. He's this very righteous, God-fearing Christian person, never has any trouble. So I do think a lot of people thought he might be acquitted. I know they were writing news articles at the time, very afraid. Jason Manning was very afraid he was going to get acquitted. And in fact, your jury deliberated a long time. So I do think he made
Not really.
You don't think
5 hours? No.
more than it was more. It was a full day. They were out. That's a long time.
Well,
in DC. You don't think so? In DC?
No, actually, it is a long time
In DC?
In DC. We've seen them come back much sooner than that. But obviously, yours was a single defendant case. It wasn't 5 or 6 or 7 people in the courtroom at the same time, or defendants. So yeah, for a single defendant, that was pretty good amount of time. Let's go backwards in time now a little bit, and then, as I said before, we'll get back to the current situation, because I really want to drill down on some of your opinions about what you have been through, what you've both been through. But let's go back to the beginning here. Dr. Gold, you've already stated that you're both an attorney and a doctor. We obviously, myself included, because I was working on a book on COVID during the lockdowns. Myself and another writer had begun the process of co-writing a book together. I was handling the technical side of things, and he was handling the more political side of the commentary of this book. So we obviously were aware of who you were at the time and what you went through. So just, briefly, Americans Frontline Doctors, you founded this organization. Just let everybody know what that was and how you suddenly became in the spotlight.
So I was a board-certified emergency physician for more than 20 years, working on the front lines of ERs. If you had a heart attack, stroke, broken leg, hip fracture, asthma attack, whatever it was, I was your woman. I was your ER doctor. And very non-controversial, I would say beloved, respected, never had any issues ever. Never had a malpractice case, never had a reprimand, never had any censure, zero. Very well regarded. When COVID struck, though, there were a lot of lies that were being told by the government. It took me months to put this together, looked at all the research, looked at China, looked at the coronavirus task force, and it was very clear that the American people were being lied to in a big way on many, many issues. We were told 6 feet social distancing was a thing. That's a lie. We were told that masks could keep out tiny inspiratory respiratory viruses that are 0.1 micron in size. That was a lie. We were told early treatment doesn't exist. That was a lie. And I think actually, in a way, the biggest medical lie of all was that everyone was equally vulnerable to this virus. False. There were people who were very vulnerable. That was the old and the frail. But young, healthy people were not. So I knew pretty early on that they were just trying to take down our country and shut it down. So I gathered with lots of other physicians, and we became public. And we spoke out in the summer of 2020, and we stood on the steps of the Supreme Court. We are America's Frontline Doctors. You don't need to live in fear. We've got all the answers for you. And then overnight, I went from being this highly respected, non-controversial person,
Anonymous doctor,
anonymous, happy ER doctor, to being a quack. It happened very rapidly, very rapidly. It was funny, and I just want to say in my own defense that I graduated medical school when I was 23. I was the youngest doctor in America at the time, and then I went to Stanford University Law School, top school, top student, but suddenly I became a quack.
Yeah, well, a leftist's quack is a truth teller's queen.
Yeah, and you were in fact one of the first people that when we start talking about being deplatformed,
Yes.
you were one of those initial victims of that mindset.
Yes. So there was a lot, just to kind of sum it up, there were a lot of doctors that you didn't know about, but there were really thousands across the world. But I had kind of coalesced us, put us together, gave us a voice, and we hit the ground running because the American people were so starved for this information. So that initial video got 20 million views in 8 hours before we were deplatformed by all big tech. They asked Mark Zuckerberg about me at a congressional hearing, like, why did you take the doctors off? It's become known that Fauci censored us. It's all become known. But people turn to us for early treatment medication. They turn to us for truthful information. And we brought a lot of lawsuits against making the shots mandatory. So we are really a medical civil liberties organization, and that's what I do.
So the John Strand story, though, is
a little
very
different.
As a matter of fact, your current look right now, this is not the historical John Strand.
Yeah. This is the first and last time you'll see this.
So you have not cut your hair or your beard since
I
you
entered
were
the BOP.
incarcerated. So how many months has that been now?
12.
12 months. And we may be taking care of that later today.
It's a rumor I heard.
Right. And so tell us what your background is.
I'm a self-described maverick. I'm a professional artist of multiple disciplines. I've been an actor in Hollywood, a professional fashion model, a musician, a writer, now an author. So a lot of different things. But my passion has always been people and storytelling and communicating and inspiring. So
this takes us now to where we really want to find out how you got to DC on January 6th, because I want to ask the first thing before we get to how the two of you ended up there together and what your function was that day, what your role was that day, because I know that you were an invited speaker to speak on a licensed, legally permitted stage that day, actually permitted by and signed off on by the assistant chief of the Capitol Police. So that has to be known. Most Americans still don't know that there were 6 permits issued by Capitol Police that day on the Capitol property alone. There were 82 total First Amendment permits issued by all of the various agents, Park Police, et cetera, that day in D.C. So there was a lot of activity that was going to go on that day. Myself, with the writer that I told you about that I was working on the COVID book, he and I went to cover the event that day. We drove up from Raleigh, North Carolina, and I'm standing in this sea of people. We couldn't even get to the ellipse. By the time we were there, it was the crowd was so packed and it was impenetrable. We tried. So we stayed up on the Washington Monument lawn. And I did a 360 camera, review of that crowd. And I've never been in a crowd that large in my life. And I looked at my colleague and I said, why are these people here? It's a cold, very windy Wednesday. This isn't a Saturday. Conservatives work. Why are they here on a Wednesday? Is it because they're still not working because of COVID? Or are they just so frustrated that they're ready to pop? And we had a discussion on that basis. So that's all I want to say about that, because this is not about me today. What I want to know is what made you show up on a cold windy Wednesday on January 6th.
You want me to?
I'll start.
Sure.
So for me, I'm a public speaker. I speak on COVID. I speak on medical freedom. I do think that medical tyranny is the way they plan to take down all of our constitutional freedoms. But publicly, I only speak on what I know more than other people, right? And that would be all the medical. So I had 4 speaking engagements that week, January 3rd, January 5th, January 6th, and January 10th. And I was going to all of them. The 6th happened to be a larger audience than usual, but otherwise indistinguishable. Same speech that I give, medical freedom. As you mentioned, we had a permit to speak there. So we were there all day. It was freezing cold. But when the time came, we walked over through this impenetrable crowd that took a very long time to get there to the permitted location. And that's why we were in DC, was for my public speech. And then you'll get to your part, but John was working for me. That's why he was there. So neither of us actually went specifically to protest the election results. We were there because there's a large crowd to talk to. Now, you should be able to speak on the election if you want to, but it happened that that's not why we were there.
And you were there performing what function?
I was providing security for her as well as communications assistance. I've worked my way slowly up to being the creative director at America's Frontline Doctors, but that was 3 some years ago. So just to back up to the beginning, or at least the beginning of that part of the story, Dr. Gold and I both from California for many years, but I was in a different professional space, so we did not interact until COVID happened and shut the whole world down. At that point, I was still working in film and fashion. And I realized literally in January of 2020 where this was going. And I felt called by God to step to the front line of the public space just to call out lies and alarm people that our liberties are being taken, as the 4 founding fathers admonished us to do. So as soon as I started doing that, I started getting a lot of dirty looks, and it doesn't go over well in Hollywood. And I said, I don't care, I have to do it. So I helped to co-lead the Beverly Hills Freedom Rally, which started to draw thousands and thousands of people into downtown Beverly Hills in support of health and human rights, basically. And we had a lot of really notable people come and speak, along with Dr. Gold being one of them. That's how we first met.
Did you stay for the entire speech by President Trump?
We were there. We were there probably since about 7 a.m, and we left before he finished. So we probably took an hour to walk from the Ellipse over to Permit Area 8, which it should have taken 30 minutes perhaps.
18 minutes. It's an 18-minute walk.
That's how crowded it was. But so we left before he did.
Right.
So we arrived
a little after 2.
So John forgot to say he would also moonlight in security. So he was a licensed security guard. So for all of my speaking events up until then, he usually was kind of my right hand, making sure security was okay. And I mention that especially because when you look at all the closed caption TV of us, you can literally see him looking around like a security detail would.
Now, interestingly, and I'm sure you're going to recall this, but it's very important for everyone to know that when you did leave the Ellipse, you and the group, the larger group that you were walking over with at the time, received the assistance from a couple of other individuals. Do you remember who those were?
I'm so glad you brought this up. So the day was I was speaking, you were helping me, and we were walking, and I did not know until really 2022.
Yeah, it was well after.
Wow.
We had people helping us. I remembered them as strong men who just were helping us get through this huge crowd. I didn't know anything other than, thank you so much for helping us get through this strong crowd.
Right.
Really, I think it was in 2022.
That was clearly their purpose.
But they were just strong men helping us. Really was all I knew. I didn't know their names. I didn't know
their affiliation.
I knew nothing about them. Okay. Simultaneously, you read terrible things in the paper about these horrible people, militia groups, paramilitia groups. And then one day my criminal defense attorney calls me and said, you know who was guarding you that day? I'm like, who? She goes, those were Oath Keepers. Oath Keepers? Are you serious? They were Oath Keepers? Yeah. She says, will you Absolutely, I'll testify for them. Absolutely. I didn't even know myself that they were just there volunteering as good citizens to help us get to our stage.
And of course, we saw in the first Oath Keepers trial, which I covered, I was there every single day for that trial, we saw the video presentations by the defense teams because the government did not want the jury to know that they were actually really there doing actual security, volunteer security details for individuals like yourself and for the other stages and for the VIPs that were coming over to make sure that they successfully made it through that big crowd safely and on time. And that, of course, all fell apart by the time you got to the Capitol.
But they did safely deliver us. So
That's
they
correct.
did their job.
Correct.
I mean,
they did their
thank God
job.
for the Oath
That was
Keepers
the
being there.
reason they were there. One of those was the guy that actually was the trailing security guy for your group that day. His name is Ken Harrelson. And you clearly, like you said about John, you could clearly see him on the CCTV doing his job, looking around, making sure you're safe. As Kenny was trailing you guys for that mile walk from the Ellipse to the Capitol, he is, actively watching. Half the time he's turning around, he's walking backwards, making sure that nobody is coming into your space when you watch those videos. And so I got to see those during the trial of them actually doing their job. And of course, as a result, I saw that you guys were in that particular group. So you get to the Capitol. And by the time you arrive, of course, the breaches have already begun on the west side. And the breach has not happened on the east side yet. So you were there for that. Were you up at the line? Did you just witness it? Explain to me how the progression of events were from the time that barricade fell apart until you actually went into the building.
There were no barricades that we could see when we got there. They were already
They were already gone.
They were gone.
On the east side?
Yeah.
There were no barricades.
There were just people milling around, which we expected because we were expecting to have a speech, a number of speeches. I never saw the stage. I was like, where's the stage? We knew Congress people were going to be there to speak, which means they would have an entourage and their own security. So I was looking for all this infrastructure and clear instructions on how to operate. I had one client, so I took care of that. But there was no one else around and no organization or infrastructure around, which was bizarre. We were already an hour late. It was scheduled for 1 p.m. We got there shortly after 2. Yeah.
There was also a flyer that was being distributed.
That's where it says 1 p.m.
Oh, you're right. Well, first of all, the president over at the Ellipse took the stage an hour late, 57 minutes late to be exact. And then he went, he didn't leave the stage till 1:16. That's why so many of us peeled off, because we knew there was other things going on at the Capitol. My colleague and I, we left about halfway through the speech to get ahead of that crowd. We knew where the crowd was going. There were flyers about that. Even in those flyers, even though technically the east steps of the Capitol were in the closed off, quote unquote, restricted space,
It says the
on
steps.
the flyer, it said that there would be a protest on the steps.
I'm glad you brought that up because I know that.
Right. So that flyer had been distributed to God knows how many hundreds of thousands of people, millions probably,
Millions.
that never didn't
It
show
was
up.
publicized online for weeks in advance.
Right. In fact, these events were already scheduled even before President Trump announced on December 19th that he was going to have his own separate rally
That
at
is
the
correct.
Ellipse.
They were first before Trump.
That's right. So all of a sudden, you're there. There's no barricades, and you see people going up the steps. Or were the people already on the steps when you arrived?
No, I mean, a few towards the, but after we got there, and it was unclear what was going to happen, and we were waiting for something to happen and an opportunity to speak in some fashion, and people moved towards the steps, and my mind remembered the flyer, and I'm just thinking, I guess they're just going to protest on the steps and wave their flags and sing their songs, and if someone speaks, who knows where they'll do it from. And then she turns to me and says, like, I got to go speak.
Right.
Like, if there's no stage, if there's no microphone, I have to speak anyway, and that's where the people are. So I'm going that way. And
I'm going to get this off my chest.
Yeah. And I had the security guard instinct that says, like there's no plan for that. And I don't know enough details about what's going on. And I would, if she had given me the opportunity, I would have said, let's wait a couple minutes, try to make another phone call or talk to somebody else. But she wasn't waiting. So I followed her. And within a few minutes of making our way across that short distance to where the steps were, I realized, okay, there's no police or crowd control here other than 6 officers standing in front of the door. And so that's just bizarre, but what can be done about it? I don't know. And people are making their way up the steps and to the balconies. And I thought, well, that's actually her one shot of being able to sort of get some attention and speak to at least some people that could hear, is if she could get up on that balcony. We were on the right side, so we tried to angle for the right balcony, but there were too many people already smashed up in that section. And we kind of got shoved towards the center.
So skipping over the controversies or the misinformation about the Columbus doors and the famous magnetic locks, so we don't need to get into that. But eventually the door was open, and you guys weren't actually trying to get inside. No. You got caught up in that surge of people.
Yeah, we got pushed over. We almost fell. She almost fell. She did fall, actually. I caught her. It's on camera.
I just want to say that as a physician, I was extremely offended that our government was murdering people in terms of COVID. Like that was the mindset I was in for probably a year and a half. People look back and they're like, why did you feel? I'm like, because they're killing people and I'm a doctor and we have to not kill people. So like there was no stopping me from delivering that message, but I was not able to be heard. We then, and I don't particularly like crowds, we were hugging the wall because that seemed like the safest place to be. And then the door swung open from the inside. And there's CCTV that shows us tumbling into the building because there's people behind us.
Surging in.
And it was a human surge
Correct.
that caught a lot of people that had no intention of going inside, but they did. They were okay. So then you moved through the building. I'm gonna go quickly here because I want to get some what I think are maybe more salient points along the way. But you did end up with a large group of people near the House chamber when that went off. Coincidentally, when the tear gas went off in that moment while y'all were up there by the door, you both went right past me. Now, I didn't know who you guys were, and you didn't know who I was, but you actually passed me and passed my camera at that time. And then, so I think you were first going to try and deliver your remarks in Statuary Hall. Am I correct about that?
I literally, to this day, really don't know the names of the places.
So we had no idea that was the House chamber when we were there. We were just sort of stumbling around like, where do we go? How do we get out of here?
It was a large assemblage of people at that moment.
Yeah, and that moment there was chaotic and cramped. So we got kind of stuck in that vestibule. You'll see in the video that we're behind the baluster, so like some protection and just like
Again, against the wall.
Yeah, and when is it going to settle down so we can find our way out of here? And eventually we could see, okay, they're not opening those doors. They want us to go this way. So we just reversed and went back from whence we came. And at that point, we really didn't know where else to go. And this was an interesting point in the trial. They tried to say, well, there were hallways down this way with nothing blocking you and no one going down there. And I said, did you want me to run around and conduct my own tour of the Capitol and investigate congressional offices? Or would you like me to proceed on the public hallways that are clearly marked by red velvet ropes, which is what we stayed within? What's the more appropriate behavior? It was crazy. It's ridiculous. So we doubled back and we ended up through Will Rogers Hall and then Statuary Hall. Now, we would have continued to go towards the rotunda, but there were way too many people there. I mean, what were we going to do and get caught in a huge jam? So we just stopped to kind of collect our thoughts and think, what's next? And she said, well, what if I do the speech and you can just film it? So at least I've given it. I mean, that was her obligation. And I said, I mean, that's a great idea. I don't have any better ideas.
You actually had your prepared remarks with you, didn't you?
There's all the video of me. I have to say, as a lawyer, putting my lawyer hat on, when you look at the video, all of our time in the Capitol was caught on videotape. I would think this is exculpatory. You can see us walking peacefully. You can see us walking between the ropes. And then you see me all the time holding my speech. And then you see me giving the speech. And if I had a criminal defense defendant like that, and I was the criminal defense attorney, I'd be stoked. I'd be like, I'm getting my client off. This is fantastic. This is great. There's no violence. There's no anything.
When do you have a defendant that wants more video evidence of his activity?
And
I'm like, can I have all of it? All the 50,000 hours that thank God Tucker Carlson discovered? Yes.
Exactly. So you do end up eventually in the rotunda, and then you get on the Eisenhower statue. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, why do you think you were not charged for that? Because that is a federal crime.
So I don't know that the government even looks that closely.
What's a federal crime?
You mean
Actually standing on a piece of furniture, on a statue, or even a bench. You know why I know that?
Why?
Is because when they were initially going to charge me back in November of 2021, which they didn't, at that time, they were going to charge me with that statute because I had stood on a bench in the crypt to get above the crowd so I could get my camera above the crowd and film the crowd. And they were actually going to charge me.
So I never knew that. I felt like maybe they folded that into parading or something, but I want to just say on the record, because I haven't really been given the opportunity before, and you remember this, I never touched the statute ever.
We were so careful.
I was so respectful, and it means a lot to me. I think it means a lot to anybody who believes in our nation and the Constitution.
But you were on the pedestal.
I was absolutely on the pedestal, but I got on the pedestal, you helped me, and I never touched the statute ever. I just want to say that, like, it meant a lot to me. I don't know why they didn't. I don't know why the DOJ does what it does, period.
I had no idea that standing on a bench is a federal
we didn't
crime.
know, we just learned that right now.
Yeah, I would suggest that that's probably ludicrous.
Yeah, I've actually read the statute. It really is.
That's ludicrous.
That's whether you do any damage to it.
Right, that's what I'm saying. If you damage a statute, it's common sense that should be inappropriate. But standing on a bench, no.
There's too many federal statutes, is that.
About 300,000 too many.
So you delivered your remarks. And somebody handed you a bullhorn.
Somebody handed us a bullhorn, and you can see there's a crowd that gathers. I think it was helpful to the police, quite frankly, because it was calm and people were listening and paying attention. There was a little applause, a little questioning.
Police testimony in my trial corroborates what she said. The prosecutor lied and said they incited another riot. But the police officers in my trial, several of them, all corroborated what she said.
And clearly CCTV shows you did not.
Your own eyes can tell you the story.
A riot. Right. So you've delivered your remarks and then you leave. All right. When did it first hit you that there might be a price to pay for what you thought you did legally and peacefully that day?
I want to say that we had a normal dinner that night and had no idea. We didn't watch TV, is my recollection. But the next evening in D.C., met friends for dinner. They were incredibly alarmed. They said, you were there, it was an insurrection. And we're like, what are you talking about? No, it's very dangerous, it's very bad, this is going to be very bad. And I remember thinking, well, that's crazy. I was like, that's crazy, this wasn't anything. And during that dinner, I got a text from a friend with a photo of
FBI's
me
most wanted list
on the FBI's most wanted list. FBI's most wanted list. So but I remember thinking it was photoshopped and being very surprised. Still, I thought, well, maybe they just need some time to figure out who are the bad guys, because I had seen people climbing the scaffolding. I thought, well, maybe they just need time to figure out who the bad guys. On that FBI most wanted list, they said they're looking for people who were violent. I'm like, well, that's okay, because that's not me, not you. It was both of us. And I still really didn't think anything. And as I mentioned, I had 4 public speeches to do that week. I had one more coming up on January 10th. So we flew off to Florida to do that speech. I went back and looked. I didn't even mention January 6th in that speech. Isn't that interesting? Like, I didn't think this. And then a couple days later, media was calling me and I was like, oh, that's interesting. So Washington Post, I think I gave an interview. I was straightforward. But if I tell you that we were shocked that we were arrested, totally shocked.
And how many days after
It was
January
12
6th?
days after January
12 days later, and it still had not, even though the dragnet had been thrown.
We could see the press and we could see it, but I still believed in the rule of law. So I thought, well, okay, they don't know who's who. They're trying to figure it out, but it's really obvious that we didn't do anything.
Yeah,
So
at the very least, they're going to go after the violent people
that's
first.
what I thought they were going to go after the violent people.
Right.
But
But instead, they went after high-profile individuals. They went after journalists. One of the first persons arrested in Florida was a journalist. They're doing the job of journalism, hired by a mainstream television station out of Mobile, Alabama. And they raided him just a few days afterwards with 25 agents, misdemeanor charges.
in retrospect, I do think I was, they got you because you were with me, but I do think they arrested me very fast. I think it's perplexing. I grew up in America. It did not make any sense. I'm telling you that when the FBI was shrieking outside our door, it never occurred to me that was real, even after J6, because I believe in the rule of law. Why would the FBI be coming to break down my door? That didn't make any sense.
So here we jump in time again. So John Strand was found guilty. He was sentenced to 32 months. First impression, did you think you were going to be hit worse than that, or was that what you were expecting?
I was expecting worse.
You were expecting worse.
Yeah.
So there was a sense of relief or not?
No.
No sense of relief.
No.
What can you say about the Bureau of Prisons itself?
It shouldn't exist.
It shouldn't exist at all, or should be reformed?
I said exactly what I meant.
And explain that.
So by and large, I don't think prison as a form of punishment is legitimate for the most part. It's not biblical. It's not effective. I think it's unethical.
And believe it or not, classical liberals believe the same thing,
for the wrong reasons.
but for maybe the wrong reasons.
No, but there's room to talk to classical liberals on this.
Yes, there is common ground there. Now, in your experience, you did spend some time in solitary, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. How much time? And just, I want to know, I don't know what that was, because we know that that type of isolation is torture. Explain that to me.
You just explained it.
Yeah.
It's hell on earth.
Give me a better sense of what that felt like. How long did it take after being in isolation before your mind starts turning in on itself?
The mind turning in on itself, it happens faster than you think. Particularly when you don't know the end game. The end game or the end date. So they throw you in there and they don't tell you really anything. A lot of times they don't even tell you what they throw you in there for, but they definitely don't tell you when you can expect to get out. So your mind starts turning in in that sense, because your mind can't process information properly if you can't forecast what's coming to a certain degree.
The unknown
Yeah,
is the torture.
it is.
What did you do to survive those periods of time?
I prayed.
You prayed. So talk about that. How did your faith get you through this entire process?
My faith is the only way I even signed up for this to start with, and it's the only thing that's carried me all the way through. So I am incredibly grateful to my God for speaking to me and allowing me to hear his voice and understand his character and have a vision for what my purpose is in life generally and what my purpose was in this J6 experience.
When you first heard, well, actually, let me rephrase that.
Yeah.
How did you first hear about the 1512 being overturned? And then subsequently, when did you learn that your judge, Christopher Cooper was going to release you?
So I've been since I was transferred from Miami and the isolation abuse to a different facility in Oakdale, Louisiana, where it was definitely less oppressive. I was able to be in general population. I was able to get eyes on Fox News, at least, for headlines and so forth. And I was also able to finally contact my attorneys, which, believe it or not, Miami blocked me from almost entirely for most of the time, which is outrageous. But anyway, I was able to actually converse with my attorney, so I was more clued in on the appeal process, and we were ecstatic when our attorney, Nick Smith, who's part of that Fisher team, successfully was granted cert on the 1512 charge. So since then, I've been watching like a hawk for updates on that case, and I knew the decision was coming imminently in a few days, and I would watch on the morning news, and then on June 28th, they announced it, and I basically did what President Trump did. I did some pretty strong fist pumps and exaltation and gratitude, and I prayed and thanked God, and I called Dr. Gold and said,
Who delivered to you the news from Judge Cooper?
that was Dr. Gold.
By phone call? Or you?
Yeah, on the
Okay.
phone.
So let's go back a moment, and Dr. Gold, I saw your head and I saw your facial expression when he was talking about the fact that when in Florida, you couldn't even reach your attorney. This is a very common story among so many January 6th defendants, and Americans by and large, left and right, absolutely do not believe that that's happening, that they are being denied access to their attorneys.
Let me be super clear about that. I'm an attorney. I'm a licensed member of the bar. We tried many times to get in. Because I have a personal relationship with John, I didn't just do it on my own behalf. We had his appellate attorney, lead appellate attorney, also requesting to get in. So it's not as though they could pretend they didn't let me in because I was friendly with John, right? They didn't let any attorney in. They didn't let any attorney make a phone call or an email or letter. It was unbelievable that you can just disappear somebody in our American system. And I want to back up and I think I agree with what John said when you asked about his opinion on the BOP. And I want to clarify a little bit. The Bureau of Prison, the Federal Bureau of Prison, is this huge behemoth federal agency that's just as dysfunctional as the Department of Education, as the IRS, as the Health and Human Services, as the CDC, as we've seen the CIA and the FBI be. So it's no different. It exists to feed itself. It's
Correct.
like a beast that has to be fed. And when you go back to the Bible, there is no biblical precedent for
Enslaving people.
What's the word I'm looking for? Imprisoning people for extended periods of time. It actually violates God's law. Now, God does believe in punishment. You can have corporal punishment, you can have financial punishment, and you can have capital punishment. But there is no biblical precedent for isolating people and imprisoning them for years at a time. This is something that Western and other nations have developed. But I think that your opinion on the BOP comes from that. Because first of all, at its premise, which is to remove people from their life, doesn't really do anything for the person, for society, et cetera.
Definitely doesn't do anything for the victim, yeah.
And it's become
In fact, the victim has to pay for it.
And it's become a huge federal agency that has to feed itself. And we've now seen how dysfunctional it is. And because the prisoners, in any system in life, you have two parties that have to negotiate with each other. You have a husband and wife, you have a parent and child, you have a teacher student, you have, interviewer, interviewee. There's always a relationship, right? But in the Bureau of Prison, you have a prisoner who is given zero rights, which by the way is not how the law is. You're supposed to have some rights, but they give them zero rights. So you're in a system which is 0 and 100. And the problem with that system is that even if you have a decent guy here, eventually it will get corrupted and they will walk all over this zero. Right. That's what the BOP is.
So we have to close it out here. Tell me this. What's next for John Strand?
That's a great question. There's a lot coming, but
give us a peek.
Well, the J6 hostages are a travesty. So I don't think a single citizen in this country should have peace of mind or heart until this issue is resolved. We would not accept if there were hundreds of innocent Americans locked up in a prison in Russia, for example. I mean, the outrage would not stop until they were returned. So why is that any different?
Talk about your book.
The book is called Patriot Plea. And it's almost hard to talk about it because there's so much in it, but I promise you will not regret reading it. It's going to shed light on what's wrong in our entire country. It's going to completely reset how you think about everything. My description for the book is essentially that we can get universal agreement from everyone, left and right, that our country's in a bad place. Everyone says that things are bad. We agree on that. Also, everyone, if they're intellectually honest, would agree that we all are basically doing the same thing over and over again, which is the definition of insanity. We think something's going to change, but we're all doing the same thing. So what's wrong with that picture? So I cover that. But I also explain in explicit detail essentially every moment that I experienced through the last year.
How long is your probationary period?
Technically, it's a year.
It's a year. Will that be modified as a result of the change of no longer having a felony charge?
It was 3 years of supervised release on the felony. So right now it's 3 until the felony finishes being adjudicated and is removed. Then there would be a year until I finish the appeal, which God willing I'll win and beat the misdemeanors. But by then that time will have expired.
And Dr. Gold, is your probationary period over?
Yes, my probation's over. So I did 60 days and then I had 1 year of supervised release. I expect that John's 3 years will be reduced to 1 year chasing those misdemeanors, but John has his appeal still going, the appeal to remove the misdemeanors.
Right.
So we'll see what happens. And
will there be any need to modify your speech a little bit while this appeal process is going on?
In my view, no, not really.
Okay.
I'm always respectful and deferential when it's appropriate. I was before. I will continue to do that. I don't really change.
Yeah.
I believe in one truth, and I pursue that without fear and without apology. So I spoke respectfully and appropriately regarding my judge in the court system before and accurately, and I will continue to do that.
Dr. Gold, John Strand, on behalf of myself, Blaze Media, the American people, I'm appalled at what both of you went through. But I'm also thankful for your courage, and thanks for being with us today.
Thank you. For having us.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Guys, shall we?
Let's go. Let's do it.
Come on, let's do this thing. So how many days since your last shave, John?
366. Man, that is a hell of a beard.
So we got John's mom on the phone, and we're gonna get the shave. We're gonna get the shave.
John Strand is back.
Your whole family's watching.
The real John Strand coming back. That's right.
Can the real John Strand please stand up?
We got the girls in the family.
That's great.
They're all watching. All
Yeah,
right.
no, beard is gone.
There's no pressure. No pressure.
I'm brushing.
It's a year. A year. Gotta get it right.
Just tearing it down. Look, it's there. The jawline is still there. Praise God, we won at the Supreme Court because I was going to have to wear this thing for 3 years.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about that.
Wait, what?
Can you imagine 32 months of this growth?
Oh my God, 32 has been like unbearable. Get back to where you once belonged. Doesn't it look like John again?
Hey guys. Now I'm really back.
Nice job, sir. It's not easy to do on somebody else.
Woo! What do you say, John?
God is good.
Yeah.
My face and my life are free.
Your face is free. Fantastic.
Free face.